Well, welcome to Perspectives Online and, of course, on air from WFSU Public Media. I'm Tom Flanigan. This program pre-recorded on Tuesday, August the 11th, and we use the Zoom platform to connect with our guests. The program to appear on both WFSU FM and the WFSU Public Media Facebook page on Thursday, August 13th. Well, we're finally now out of the political season as far as the show is concerned. Although the primary election still lies ahead of us here, that'll be coming up on Tuesday. Of course, we remind you to vote if you have not already, either early voting or by mail. But we're taking leave from conversations with candidates to get back to some other topics of great significance. And you know, for people with disabilities, one of the most significant events in American history took place on July 26th, 1990. 30 years ago, the Americans with Disabilities Act took effect on that day. And to commemorate that and to provide an update on how the legislation has been implemented in the years since, as well as what more needs to be done, we have a great panel to talk about it. And let's go around and meet these folks. The implementer of this whole conversation we'll start off with, and certainly no stranger to these airwaves, J.R. Harding, relentless advocate for those with disabilities, community change maker, sits on the Citizens Advisory Board of Evergreen Life Services, member of the Florida Network on Disabilities, also on the Delta Airlines Disability Advisory Board. Can you fit anything else on your business card, J.R. Harding? And welcome back.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's always a pleasure, even though we're not face-to-face in the studio, but it's a pleasure to be here today. And thank you for recognizing 30 years of the Americans with Disabilities Act.
And we certainly thank you for, again, being the relentless advocate that we referenced in that run-up, JR, to keep bringing that to our attention, and the fact that we need to continue this conversation going forward year after year. But you brought some friends along with you. We want to meet them, too. We'll say hi to Dr. Max Lee with Kugler Associates, an environmental consulting firm, primarily in air quality management, those sorts of things, but also with a connection to folks with disabilities. And Dr. Max, it is so good to meet you, sir.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I appreciate the introduction. And in terms of my activities with JR, I've been actively involved in legislative activities over the years. It's been very productive for promoting the activities that we deal with in terms of disabilities, myself being disabled as well. And as well, JR and I are involved with a more artistic stint in the wheelchair highwaymen that we can get into later, but that's definitely been our methodology for using art to promote the ADA, and here we are at 30 years out. So thank you for the introduction.
Well, thank you, Max, and certainly because our listeners and viewers here on WFSU Public Media are so up on all of the ramifications of especially aesthetics, they probably know about the Florida Highwaymen. We'll talk what you folks have done is sort of a takeoff on that a little bit later on. But before that, we say hi to Michael Elliott, CEO of SOAR Technologies, providing services to clients with visual impairments. It is indeed an honor and a pleasure to meet up with you, Mr. Elliott, sir.
I appreciate you having me here today. I've been working with JR and as well as Max for a number of years on ADA issues and accessibility, and that's primarily through SOAR Technology. We concentrate on ADA by implementing solutions for web design to make it more accessible for people that have visual impairment, as well as providing training.
That is something we can certainly get into in the course of this conversation, too, how transformational the ADA, but beyond that, even the growing awareness of the needs of people with disabilities as far as having more sustainable and supportive kinds of architecture and construction when it comes to homes and commercial applications and all that. That's a total show in and of itself. J.R. Harding, let's talk about what you have been up to since last we got together. You have had some personal changes in your life, some kind of career shuffle rolls around, but you can continue to be kind of the one of the major spark plugs in the state of Florida to continue focusing attention on the matter of people with disabilities and how we make sure that those folks are always included in everything that the rest of society is into. What you been up to?
Well, thank you, Tom. I'm a full-time faculty at the College of Business at Florida State University. I have a focus in the management department on workforce issues and inclusion. The Title I of the Americans with Disabilities Act, employment, right? That's the gateway to so much more. I'm also involved with the University of Choice Initiative, which is a students with and without disabilities, fostering relationships between those with and without disabilities, building those communities, partnering with Michael, teaching folks about adaptive sports, particularly one called goal ball, which is kind of a hybrid of bowling and dodgeball, and it involves both people with visual impairments and those without impairments. Beyond that, as Max was saying, we have the wheelchair highwaymen artwork and our engagement with Arts for All. At the Capitol, we've been trying to push more and more of our items, like, for example, technology following the person, or maybe it is surpassing that of the basic ADA standards that are laid out, because minimum standards is not good enough for your home, not good enough for my home, not good enough for your business, and how do we incorporate us into all of that? And as you quite rightly said, engaged with Blueprint, the Delta Airlines, Evergreen Life Services, and the Florida Network for Disabilities keeps me quite busy, and I'm very blessed to live in this community.
Well, Max Lee, let's talk about your experience here as a person with disabilities and a member of the wheelchair highwaymen, but certainly in the 30 years since the passage and the adoption of the ADA, even the most casual observer of the American scene would testify that we seem to be more open and accessible as far as our public accommodations are concerned. Now, individual households may be another matter completely, but it seems to be that we are on the right track. What's your assessment of that? And also, where do you think we need to go with this?
So, and great question. I was injured myself back in 1987 before the passage in 1992. And so I've, like JR, I've experienced the evolution over time and grown up with it, so to speak, and seen what's changed. And there certainly is a lot of aspects that are addressed through building code development, keeping in mind that building code development is just one implementation tool of a Civil Rights Act that we're dealing with here. You know, it's the kind of the bones, the overall structure is the act, and within that, the implementation is through building codes, which are evolving over time. And JR, thank you for your activity on the Access Board to evolve those codes over time. And yeah, I have seen it change over the years. There are still issues to be dealt with. Misconceptions that grandfathering, old buildings are exempt. This is an absurdity that is a constant issue. A lot of activities that were, I would say that in the 90s and early 2000s, funding was there for activities that were very helpful for me to go to school, for me to get into the business I am now the president of. It was not accessible 2 years before I started. And so when I came there as a fledgling engineer, the building was not accessible. I would not have been able to go to work there, for which I'm now the president and co-owner of, if the act had not been passed at the time it was. And so, yeah, we've evolved over time, but I would say that there is certainly a lot of work to be done. And I would say there's some sort of a complacency in today's atmosphere that you see in the general public. for dealing with retrofits and changes in buildings. New construction is largely addressed, certainly in the large cities. You see those activities, and certainly in Florida, where we live today, in part due to the fact we have a large elderly population, which enhances and promotes the activities that there is a need for accessibility, regardless of the type of persons we're dealing with. You know, disabilities. JR can throw out the statistics better than I can, but certainly within a person's life, there's a certain high probability that you will have a period of time in your life where you are disabled, even though the majority of your life you're not. And so you will deal with these issues. And everybody's got a family member or such that deal with these issues that, you know, or a friend or a family member that makes them have to experience the frustrations that you deal with. If it's some places are not accessible, simply the fundamentals of getting into a building, getting parking, you know, the basics of just daily activities of daily life. Can you get into your post office, things like that. Those are certainly improved over the years. But I would say that there is certainly a complacency now and a presumption of, well, it's done and we're, you know, that issue is done with. That is not the case. And it certainly needs to be reviewed constantly for, you know, what is the level of accessibility, not just talking about building codes, but JR and Michael can get into the fact of employment, things that are really you know, to be functional in society. You know, me being a president of a company is not normal. JR and Michael can tell you the statistics of unemployment that are just shocking. So those are things that you constantly need to be reviewing as a society to ensure that there's inclusion and that you're promoting the benefits of society to everybody, and everybody can promote and, you know, be taxpayers, so to speak, and provide to the society the things they want to. Everybody likes to be able to contribute, and it can be difficult when you're when you have some disabilities. So
well, indeed, Max, what you just mentioned here, and that's a wonderful segue to talk to Michael Elliott on this, that I can recall when, let's see, Blind Services of Florida, that was one of the primary employers of people with visual impairments. And down in the lower level of even the Leon County Courthouse, there was a little kind of like a kiosk space where folks who had been who had obtained employment through the that organization would sell, I guess, candy bars and little things like that. And then the perception was, oh, well, this is about the only thing that folks with visual impairments, profound blindness, can actually do. Michael, that attitude has changed dramatically, but still there are a lot of things that need to be done in the face of the misperception that blindness is no longer really a thing. We have surgeries, we have other medical technologies that can help rectify those issues, and that, you know, they're, who's blind anymore? Well, it is more pervasive than people think.
Also, if you take a look at with the new technology, you mentioned surgery, but take a look at technology, which has opened a lot of doors for individuals that are blind and visually impaired with computers, with a different type of screen software, braille displays, and monitors that individuals are able to use at this point. I worked for Blind Services for 17 years, and my last position was rehab engineer. I was also the bureau chief of client services, as well as the business enterprise program. You referenced that when you mentioned the kiosk with individuals selling candy bars. That's related to the Randolph-Shepard Act. And basically how that program worked at the time and continued with federal and state buildings was obligated to the Randolph-Shepard Act if Blind Services set up a facility there that sold candy bars or a snack bar cafeteria. They were able to set that up, but there was resistance in the process. And doing that, trying to educate is the primary thing, I think, that comes from the ADA. And we still have to continue to educate individuals about people with all types of disabilities and the type of work that they are capable of doing today. And I think the ADA has been wonderful. There's, like you mentioned before, there's still a lot of work because it's in writing. People are not reinforcing it or practicing it because they're not educated about it.
Circling back around, J.R. Harding, to something that Max Lee just brought up, and also Michael Elliott talked about, employment opportunities for people with disabilities. The concept is surprisingly, should we say, seasoned. I love looking at old black and white documentaries from the so-called golden age of television and even before that. And I found a whole bunch of them online on YouTube not too long ago. It was a Saturday morning series, and it was essentially propaganda that was put out by the American Association of Manufacturers, and it was called Industry on Parade, and they would go into steel mills and textile plants and everything else to show what was being done in this country after World War II. And I found a 1950 episode that focused on employment opportunities in industry for people with disabilities. And it was a long segment. It was almost 10 minutes long. Showed people who were in wheelchairs, who had visual impairments, who maybe had, come out of World War II and they had multiple other issues. But it was urging employers to hire people with disabilities because they were great workers and had a wonderful ethic and all this sort of thing. So that is not new. Again, that goes back to 1950, which I found very surprising. But in a situation like we have now, JR, with COVID rampant and opportunities for employment kind of at a low ebb because we've lost so many jobs, that makes it even tougher, though, for folks who have any kind of impairment or disability to even find work, isn't it?
Well, it is, but then that goes back to the biases and where the numbers start in the very beginning. So the mainstream society had employment numbers around 76% of the able-bodied population between 16 and 64 working or participating in the labor force. And persons with disabilities were around that 27 to 31%, depending upon what data you were looking at in terms of participation in the labor force. But yet right now you have three very separate, very distinct professionals, all with profound disabilities, contributing, laboring, participating, and otherwise providing in their homes and their communities. So the story that you speak to goes back to really the story of the veterans coming out of World War I and World War II and the transformational impact that our great wars have had on our communities, on our universities, on Miami, on the state of Florida, right? Jacksonville, Pensacola, right? Tampa. All of these environments would not be where they are today had there not been veterans and people with disabilities. But often we are then left out, and therefore we need to become more competitive. But what I would suggest, however, is the term accommodation, right? Telework, right? Using of technology, solving everyday problems. These are the things that people with disabilities from birth to death within a variety of issues have been solving. So what kinds of, proven techniques could we bring to the workplace, to the business that would solve some innovative problems, that would give them a new market space and allow them to come out of this COVID-19?
So, Maxley, does this then mean that technology is kind of the great leveler to a degree when it comes to folks with disabilities, allowing them to compete more one-on-one with other members of the workforce?
Yeah, I would add to that education in relation to the technology as well, the evolution. You look at the three of us, and we're all highly educated. I have a PhD and a PE, and I would not have that if it wasn't for a lot of the social services available to me as a young man to be able to get to that level. And in addition, the technology. I mean, Michael was laying out exactly like it is worlds apart from when even I was young in terms of the wheelchair technology, but also Michael has pointed out At the conferences I've gone to, some of the Braille, or rather for the blind, some of the activities, it's marvelous. The codes that you call it building code, but the computer coding that's required now for making websites accessible for the blind. It's remarkable the amount of intense energy that's going on to that. It's very valuable. And technology in regards to when I mentioned, our activities with regard to doing artwork, that's all through drone technology. And you might be able to see behind me, that side is one of our pictures. And that's all only capable through drone technology in the last couple of years. Small enough for us to be able to handle, light small enough for us to be able to work with. And yet we can take artwork, photography of nature that anybody wouldn't be able to take without a drone. So the aspect of the artwork is independent of your disability. And so we like that aspect of being able to demonstrate that, as saying that technology is a leveler for us to be able to demonstrate our artwork. But yeah, the technology is incredibly advanced, and it's going to continue. Just working at home through COVID, I find my company is much more productive. It can be very productive at home, not much more, but is as productive. And that activity of having to travel to work through, the disabilities can be a barrier. So being able to work at home has been a benefit for hopefully those that are limited to travel for being able to be productive. But it's complicated in terms of COVID. Just talking about that aspect, it has definitely got a lot of negative aspects to it in terms of dealing with COVID and having disability, socially, medically, is multiple folds more difficult in our society right now.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on that, Michael Elliott? And I know that on the technology front, there have been massive advances there too. A gentleman that you may have known since you were associated with the Blind Industries, he was one of their clients for a while too, a legendary Tallahassee radio guy by the name of Ray Slayton, who was totally liberated when voice recognition software came to the fore, and he was able to, at his radio station, take an entire program log and have it generated in Braille so that he could follow along moment by moment as to what he was supposed to do on the radio, whereas before he had to memorize that stuff, and he had just an absolutely phenomenal ability to do that. But that was back in the early 1990s. I'm sure there's been many advances in that since then. But what do you see with that technology? And secondly, as Max was saying, what do you see as far as the job market is concerned, and the fact we have just fewer jobs in circulation right now for folks to get?
There has been more employment opportunities because of the technology. As you mentioned with Ray working at the radio station, with ADA pushing for accessibility, I wouldn't be able to be with you guys today independently. I would have to need some assistance because of the ADA forcing companies to make more of their software and programs and web is more accessible. It has opened up a lot more doors. What we got to look at, technology can get you where you need to go, but it's the attitude of the individuals who are looking to employ you. I can give you an example of a friend who applied for a federal position who's visually impaired, and she applied several times. When federal government has a Section 8 that you can fill out indicating you have a disability, guarantee you of a job interview. After interviewing, she was hired. They asked her, why did she do the Section 8? Why not the regular application? When she explained to them that she had did it twice and indicated she had a disability, she was passed on interviews. So attitude is one of the main things we need to address. The ADA is great, it's in writing. It's a good reference point, a manual that we need to use in order to advance, but without changing people's attitudes. And as you mentioned earlier, the perspective of how people view people with vision impairments, working on a stack by thinking that's the only thing that they're able to do, and they can do a lot more.
And J.R. Harding, you've got a long experience with this too, in having to educate and re-educate, as Michael said, new generations who come along who perhaps, 30 years is forever in the minds of some folks. And so anyone who's coming into, say, management of a company or any other organization and are looking to hire may not be aware that those with disabilities under the ADA are guaranteed the same civil rights as everyone else.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, and indeed, Tom, it is a constant education. You and I go all way back. We have a shared context, but then the person behind you may not, or the person who comes in on top of you may not. And that's the same with our political leaders or institutional leaders or CEOs, right? And so you're making progress, and then sometimes it's 2 steps forward or 3 steps backwards. And it's a continuous need to get past the sense of charity and understand that everybody has skill sets. And we as a community, we as a business, we as an institution, as a radio show, are strengthened by those different perspectives. And folks need to appreciate, I think, that in your pocket with your smartphone, on your TV, our new voice controls or text-to-speech, speech to text. These started within the niche community of the disability arena, and today now are common tools that everyone uses. Right. So what is the next generation of common tools through more of a universal design approach and getting past the very basic component of treating everyone equally, giving one a fair opportunity, equipping them with the skills and the tools they need, and then say, go off and do what you're good at. Find your bliss, right?
You're watching a special edition of Perspectives from WFSU Public Media, the 30th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which took effect July 26th of 1990. We have J.R. Harding, Max Lee, and Michael Elliott here with us to discuss the ramifications thereof. And if you miss all or part of any Perspectives program, it is always available to you, not only on our WFSU.org website, but also our WFSU Public Media Facebook page. We try to have the most recent program up and on those various platforms as quick as we can. Of course, it is contemporaneous to go on the air broadcast along with the posting on the WFSU Public Media Facebook page, so you can go back and watch it as well as listen to it on our regular station Facebook page. Max Lee, let's talk about accessibility when it comes to one of the hot button topics right now in our community. All the political candidates have just been pounding on this, as well they should, the need for more affordable and accessible housing in this area. And there are many contractors who apparently are very well versed with making the construction that they're involved with accessible to people in wheelchairs, and to have braille notices posted all over the place for the visually impaired and all that. But there are some who don't seem to have gotten the word yet. So is the only way that that can be enforced just an endless stream of litigation, or is that also a matter of more education for those folks who do the construction?
This is an excellent topic from the regards to effectively, the question is, how do you get these contractors to be having the knowledge and enforcing upon them? So this idea of enforceability of, in this case, you're talking about building codes. You find it varies widely from county to county or city to city as to their inspectors. They'll have highly qualified electrical inspectors, mechanical inspectors, but yet there's no one that's dedicated towards ADA aspects of building design and inspection. And there should be. Counties throughout Florida have huge variability in terms of their knowledge and their methodology of implementing code inspection. And it's unfortunate, but because Florida doesn't have a rigorous structure for ensuring that inspections, training of inspectors throughout the state of Florida include ADA, it's a weakness. And so contractors, generally, the reasons they know code is because there has been litigation. Litigation is not a very efficient methodology for enforcement. But if it's the only way, that's what happens. And then people get very upset, and you hear about this idea of drive-by enforcement, as though there's people just trying to make money off of this. Well, there are activities where you feel your rights are infringed upon, and there is no remedy. The inspectors at the county may not know the codes, or they're just not enforcing them. And once a building's put up, it's a heck of a lot more expensive to go back and retrofit a new building than it is to have done it right from the first place. So it's, you talk about this idea of education through JR, of teaching these young people in school that when you get out there, do the right thing when you start, and you won't have headaches like this and misunderstandings. So yeah, I would say that the building codes structured throughout the state of Florida needs to have a better training and instruction, much like if you're an electrical inspector or mechanical, there needs to be an ADA type of activity for training that's more systematic to prevent these long-term grievances that occur. And because, like I said, litigation is highly inefficient methodology enforcement. And that's where we're at right now. And it shouldn't be that way. It doesn't have to be that way. If the state of Florida did more legislative activities to promote, ADA inspection activities that had to be done at the county and city levels, we wouldn't be in a boat where people feel forced to do the code. They don't feel forced to do electrical code, but they certainly at times, these contractors that don't know and make mistakes and have to go back and do costly retrofits, they feel like they're being punished. But if they had known from the beginning, they wouldn't be doing these problems, having these problems.
Yeah, and Michael Elliott, I'm sure you have heard the same thing through SWORD technology, that the complaint is it costs so much money. We can't afford to do that. It will just drive these places totally beyond the capability of the market to handle them. How do you tell those folks, hey, it's really not that much more when you go in from the get-go and incorporate these kinds of things into the construction?
Especially when doing technology for website, it doesn't cost you any more to put a tag in describing the video or the graphic that's actually on the website. So as you're going along, if you tag all that information, it's just that simple. I was going to bring up something to Max, who lived in Tallahassee. When we were at the Center for Independent Living, there's an apartment complex here now that we placed someone there, and we had to do some modification. I just met an engineer, and they're actually rehabbing the entire apartment complex, and they asked me to come aboard with them because I know more about construction on the ADA side than I do on the blind side, because that's what I learned initially. So I'm out with my tape measure, measuring, giving the codes for the ramps and things of that nature. So like I say, in Leon County, they are pushing and asking the question and making sure that things are meeting the codes with the construction as they're modifying the entire apartment complex instead of coming back after they do the apartment itself.
And it's not just private sector, too. I remember this was a huge complaint that former county commissioner, Leon County Commissioner Cliff Thale had, that the Leon County Courthouse was not fully compliant with the ADA for years and years. What's the deal on that now?
Well, you may recall, Tom, with Commissioner Tony Crippa and others, they had to go back and spend about $3.4 million to make that building minimally accessible. So, going back to Max's point, but fortunately it was done without legislation issues, and that means some of our leaders understood and recognized the problem through effective education and building that empathy, telling those stories that 15% of our community lives with one or more challenging issues, right? 1 in 3 families are affected. This isn't always somebody over there and somebody over here. It is the community.
And is not that number going to increase, not only because we have heard from multiple sources, in the wake of COVID-19 infections, some people are left with profound lingering disabilities of all kinds, But on the other hand, the fact that we are an aging population, and the probability that someone in our family is going to need enhanced accessibility features in their home, in the places where they shop, all of that. I mean, this time is not on our side when it comes to these things. We're going to have to be more aggressive about getting these kinds of improvements into just about everywhere that people are, aren't we?
Yes, we are. As you mentioned before, we're an aging population and we're living a lot longer. So the accessibility, it's a major factor. Well, what I found when working with individuals and providing education, if you can have them to identify someone within their family or a friend with a disability, because they've watched that struggle. So then your job becomes a lot easier providing that education, and then they're willing to provide more support for you.
Which makes a lot of sense, but it sounds like everything else with education, whether it's teaching students about the Holocaust or the history of the civil rights movement or any of the other things that I don't know, Max, you may have some ideas on this. Should this even be incorporated kind of into the public school curriculum in some way, shape, form, or fashion? That this is something that we need to tell kids when it comes to talking about diversity, and that we have different types of folks, but we're all kind of in the same boat together.
Certainly. I think you saw all three of us shake our heads at the same time on that one. Yes, we all concur that that's a presumptive need in society. I can't express that enough. It's incredibly important. Education is everything. That's the starting point, because enforcing and all these activities are so much more ounce of preventative medicine in the beginning. Just educating to start with makes it so that society has these presumptions of the rights of the disabled that are there, and it's not charity. It's just not charity. It's a right. And we talk about building codes and things like that, but it's really the idea of disenfranchisement of the disabled that we're talking about. The building code is one implementation, but JR was talking about, or rather Michael was talking about, job opportunities where you can live, all these things that you can be negatively impacted because people are uneducated, unwilling to work with you, not seeing the idea that the concept of disability doesn't mean you're less than able to do what others are able to do. And it's, ounce of prevention, just like I was mentioning, retrofitting is much more expensive than doing it right the first time. It's a critical aspect of education. So I'm sure Michael and JR got things to add to that.
Sure.
To me, Tom, a lot of our leaders are afraid to get into the disability space. It's still that kind of, that's taboo, right? Or I might catch it. Okay, I don't want to be them, right? But I'm sure glad you get out there and you're strong. I wish I could do it. Well, the truth is, all of us will probably have to do it. And if you think of the life cycle of, the initiation piece, we all need jobs. Can you read that job application? Can you fill that job application out? Is it in an accessible format? Or your access to Zoom or to Google or Amazon? Can you complete those pieces? Are you able to put your credit card numbers in? Is there adequate time? Getting all the way to the end of the life cycle of the jobs. Can you read your benefits? Right? Can you fill out those forms? Can you access the health information? These are all pieces of that puzzle, and persons with disabilities are an essential part of all of our value decisions and the allocation of our resources to ensure we're not marginalized or otherwise segregated or left out.
Well, just as it took legislation circa July 26, 1990, to put those sorts of frameworks and expectations in place, do we now need additional legislation, perhaps on the state level, to go ahead and rubber on the road, put the full implementation of this, as you just said, JR, into effect so that everybody has access. Max, what do you think?
Certainly certain aspects. I mean, I just mentioned the simple mechanics of inspectors for new designs and retrofit design should have minimal criteria requirements at some level, meaning at the county or the city level. There needs to be some sort of level of education and certification for those that are inspectors to assure that, you know, a certificate of occupancy or a building should come with an ADA inspection as well, not just all the other things that people are used to, fire and mechanics and electricity. So, you know, one implementation aspect is that. And JR, I mean, and Michael, you guys, I'm sure, got some ideas as far as what you think legislatively should be done at the state level. We've worked at it, but what is your experience? You add.
I want to leave space for Michael. We've tackled gas station issues, recreation issues,
Right.
technology issues, but really, how do we move the whole agenda at once rather than piecemealing? And thinking about like hurricanes, we're constantly updating the building standards from what we learned. Well, you know, we've learned an awful lot from the journey of the disability, the ADA story, the journey of the Shepherd's Act and so forth. So why can this not be a normal part of the society's evolution rather than taking Michael or Max or myself or, you know, our Center for Independent Living, Ability First or APD to push just that one lever? Michael, your thoughts?
We shouldn't have to, because the legislation is there already. It's just they choose not to. I'll give an example, and maybe I'm not supposed to. My Florida market, that thing is not accessible. We were involved in the beginning when they was building it and letting them know it wasn't accessible. So their recommendation for people with vision impairment is to contact a representative who actually will key in all the information for you. That's a solution. However, when you was doing it from the ground up, all the things could have been there from the beginning. So the legislation is there. I just think it's that of having a lot of those things done and getting individuals to actually do them. It's the issue. There's so much resistance, and I can't understand why. It's the basic right of all individuals to be independent. I use the word to be independent so they can live a fulfilled life. And why should we have to fight for things that quote unquote normal people receive automatically? Example, was advocating to put Braille at a bus terminal. And I finally had to say, why do you have signage for sighted people? And that's when the light went off. Oh, okay, I understand why we need the Braille in large print now for vision impaired people. It shouldn't take that.
But as you said, Michael, it took something more than that to even get this recognition legally in place, which was the ADA. Is it just, again, implementation and the necessity to fight this battle constantly to say, folks, we got a law and y'all got to make it work?
It's a continued fight, a daily fight, to provide education and fighting with individuals, explaining to them this is the law and this needs to take place. And you're violating the ADA when you don't do it. And that's why so many lawsuits out there. You say the ADA has been in place for over 30 years. I get phone calls now from various counties throughout the United States because their website isn't accessible. And they could have done that on the front side, and it cost them more money to go back and just to make some simple corrections they could have done from the beginning. And they're have to restructure their entire website now.
Which again is a great rationale to hire more people with disabilities, because you build those recognitions into the process of whatever it is that you're doing. If you're rolling out a new product or service, the person who is working on that, who maybe has a visual or a mobility impairment or something, will say, whoa, wait a second. We have to do this and this and this to make sure that everybody can use this.
But a lot of times they are aware of the codes of what needs to be made accessible, and they just skip by and say, well, we'll do it later. It's like Max mentioned before, instead of doing it on the front end, they make an attempt to do it on the back end.
And later never comes.
Correct.
Right, because then there is the next pandemic, there is the next challenge, and that's a whole nother environment right now. And speaking of all of that, and that could be another show, but members of the disability community in general are struggling a little harder, and their families are struggling harder because they're vulnerable and not have access to some of the goods and services and supplies they normally have because they've been reappropriated to what is perceived as a greater need.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that brings us full circle, guys, back to the initial sub-question and all this. Where do we go from here? What is next as we look at the next 30 years for the ADA and perhaps some enabling legislation on the federal, state, or local level? Max, let's start with you. What do you think?
Well, I would start with thanking you because this activity we're doing right now is part of that future that we need, meaning to cut discussion, which is this is an education. I'm sure a lot of people that listen to this won't don't have this information, and it helps them understand where we are after 30 years of the ADA being passed, and that it's a living document, it's a living act, it's a living act that needs to constantly be re-updated and re-educated for the public and society to understand its value and its purpose and its intent as a right of the American citizen. And that a lot of us will be disabled regardless of our naivete throughout our lives. A lot of us will be experiencing it through ourselves or through others. And so the future is education, it's legislation, and while litigation is not effective and it's not preferred, unfortunately, I expect that to continue because of the lack of legislative activities to, like I said, make inspections for new design or, for retrofits for building. That would be a great way to prevent a lot of lawsuits. Now, if legislative activity would do that, it would prevent a lot of litigation, but will that happen state or federal level? I don't know. I would like to see it, but more conversation will drive that boat. So maybe this conversation itself will lead to those implementations and activities. So we'll see what the future is.
Well, let's have Michael Elliott jump into the conversation here. Your thoughts on the moving ahead aspect of this, Michael?
I can echo what Max said and continue education. We need to educate the next generation about people with disabilities and accommodation. And as you mentioned before, maybe it should be in the school system, part of the curriculum, where you talk about people with disabilities. Who I mostly enjoy talking to are kids when it comes to disability, because they're going to ask questions, and they always ask questions. By educating that one individual, they're going to educate someone else about a person who's blind. Adults just look at you and wonder what's wrong with that person. And that's why the curiosity of kids are so great. And to educate them, being the next generation, I think things are going to work out better in the future, and it's going to be less legislation.
I always love to see the annual white cane ceremony that would be taking place downtown, and it was usually younger folks who would be equipped with a blindfold and a cane and told, okay, get around, let's see how it works. And anyone who has undergone that certainly comes out with a different viewpoint, literally, on what it is like to be visually impaired and still be expected to function in society. So maybe that's part of it too. J.R. Harding, since you are no stranger to the Capitol, you're going to head back on down there and continue beating those folks with the information that you provide?
Always, Tom. It is my bliss, it's my passion, and the need to keep pushing the envelope, whether it's the hospitality industry, the transportation industry, or infrastructure, or private housing development, right? Employment, education. We're making it in education, okay? We've got about 15% of the college population right now are people who have raised their hand and self-identified. The truth is, that means it's a lot higher than that, right? That gets back to our issue of bias and not having the right attitudes, right? So my little forays, I like to throw those in class, the right attitude, access, accommodation, and assimilate. Right.
Before we conclude our conversation, Max Lee, got to find out how we get more information and view the work of the wheelchair highwayman. How do we find this great stuff?
Well, there's an exhibit. Well, it's wheelchairhighwaymen.com. Pretty straightforward. But really, we've also got at FSU, the Museum of Fine Arts has got one of our shows online right now, and we'll have an in-person gallery exhibit in the next coming months. And we were at the state of Florida Capitol, but I would like to stress that this is a mechanism, a method for us to show this artwork demonstrates the equality that technology has brought to us, and that we love to demonstrate the beauty of artwork that can be out there, and that it's the aspect of the ADA and the rights it's given us over the years should not be discounted for our abilities that we have today that were not there 30 years ago.
And also to show that everybody has a great vision, regardless. What a phenomenal way of getting that message across. Max Lee, we sure do appreciate it. Michael Elliott, it has been a joy and a privilege to be with you. And of course, J.R. Harding, couldn't do it without you. Thank you for being a relentless advocate on the topic, and you're always welcome to be either online or on air here on WFSU Public Media.
Oh,
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right.
Cheers.
Be safe and be well.
Indeed.
You guys too. Perspectives produced by WFSU Public Media in Tallahassee. Thanks going out to Taylor Cox, Paul Dam, Amy Diaz de la Villegas, Tricia Moynihan, and Lydell Rawls, our Director of Content, Kim Kelling, our Zoom facilitator and executive producer, and I'm Tom Flanigan. Please join us again next week for more community conversation on Perspectives from WFSU Public Media. Take care.